Well, the members of Luke's council, who we broke down recently, represent some of the biggest success stories of Luke's Jedi Order. Yes, even Kip, I guess. Any Jedi Academy has to expect some failures as well. And today we're going to be talking about some of Luke's earliest students who went to the dark side. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on 4 of the most notable ones from the early days. Luke's first class of students at his Jedi praxeum had a fairly high attrition rate, even aside from those who fell to the dark side. Kyle Katarn, Corran Horn, and Mara Jade were among these early students, and various disagreements over Luke's teaching style or just different ideas on where they could learn best led to their departures. First of the fallen students, though, is Gantoris, who is also the first student Luke finds in the Jedi Academy book trilogy when planning to open his school, though earlier on he'd already at least met some of the other future trainees like Corran, Kyle, Mara, and Cam Solusar, who all went on to become Jedi Council members. Gantoris was from a dangerous and doomed volcanic world named Yol Sha, where he used his force abilities to help the colony, acting as an early warning system for earthquakes, and less excitingly but still very usefully finding Lycan. When Luke arrives to Yol Sha, he helped to save a young child trapped by an avalanche, and unfortunately a second child had already been killed. But Gantoris really wasn't thrilled by Luke showing up or helping. For years, Gantoris had received premonitions of a dark man offering him power and then destroying him. When Luke arrives, he assumes this is Luke because of Luke's powers, the offers to train him, and crucially the Black Cloak. But ultimately Luke wins him over because he passes tests proving that he does have power to Gantoris, which doesn't really seem like it solves the underlying thing Gantoris was afraid he'd do to me, but hey, that's not my call. Luke also does promise to get the New Republic to move Gantoris' people to another planet, considering Yol Sha had been forgotten about by the galaxy and was about to get ripped apart or crushed by its own moon. But if you don't want to get crushed by a lack of Star Wars videos, remember to like and subscribe for more. Despite his remaining skepticism, Gantoris was a dedicated student and quickly moved up the ranks, ending up in a rivalry with Corran Horn. Now, some of the stories about this period are a little funny because many characters get their training with Luke's Academy compressed heavily, which we'll get to a bit more with an upcoming character. But the Jedi Academy trilogy, where we get Gantoris' story first, doesn't actually mention Corran Horn at all, since it was made before Corran was. Corran's participation is entirely added in the first-person novel I, Jedi, half of which recovers a broad section of the Jedi Academy trilogy plot, but with Corran added in and as the main character. Kyle Katarn is similarly not in Jedi Academy or I, Jedi, so his presence is added solely by the Dark Forces web supplements and the new Essential Chronology. But all of this also means we only actually see this rivalry between Corran and Gantoris from Corran's perspective. In both iterations, though, as Gantoris continued his training, he felt Luke was holding him back, especially as a mysterious voice started giving him instructions to build his own lightsaber and move beyond what Luke was teaching him. Gantoris doesn't necessarily come across great in the Jedi Academy trilogy, especially in these parts, but I do think he comes across more sympathetically than he does in I, Jedi, although again, we're seeing that from the perspective of someone who is actively engaged in a rivalry with him. Either way, the shadowy voice continued to offer him more power, and he continued to build his lightsaber, which actually had some unique functions. It had 3 Karuska gems in it, which allowed Gantoris to change the length of his blade in combat, something which Corran integrated into his own lightsaber later on. Gantoris took his new creation and challenged Luke to a duel. Luke was surprised by Gantoris' shiny new toy, given that he hadn't taught anyone to build one yet, but he agreed to a duel after Gantoris threatened to cut him down if he didn't comply. Luke was able to win the fight and even decides to return the lightsaber to Gantoris, but throughout he comments on noticing signs of the dark side and warns Gantoris about the path he's currently on. This loss and the lessons from Luke made Gantoris reconsider the path he'd been going down, and he decided he would turn against the dark voice giving him instructions, which was a good idea considering it turned out to be the spirit of an ancient Sith Lord named Exar Kun. Kun realized that this was coming and that his control over Gantoris had waned, so he goaded Gantoris into attacking by showing him images of Imperial Admiral Natasi Dalla destroying the colonists from Yol Sha on their new home, Dantooine. Gantoris and a lightsaber weren't really well equipped to kill a Sith spirit, and he ended up burned to a crisp. Arguably, Gantoris didn't go fully darkside, and he did turn away from that by the time he died, but given his position as the first to go down that dark road, I think he's worth including in this list. The second of Luke's students to go to the dark side, which we'll be talking about, has an asterisk as well, though for a different reason. This is Brackus, who, like Corran, isn't mentioned in the Jedi Academy trilogy, but does get covered by I, Jedi. He was born on the planet Mist, not to be confused with the other distinct planets of Mrist and Mrlst, and early on he was taken by the Empire and handed over to the Inquisitorius for training. After the fall of the Empire and the eventual return of Palpatine, Brachus was one of many spies sent by the Empire to infiltrate Luke's academy, so really he was already on the dark side by the time he got to Luke, which is where his asterisk comes from. The Young Jedi Knights basically make it sound like the Slugworth corporate espionage against Willy Wonka for the everlasting gobstopper. Luke is pretty easily able to suss out all of these spies, which he does with Brachus as well. But Luke recognized some good in Brachus, so he allows him to stay. This information and the idea of earlier spies doesn't hold up super well with how iJedi expanded his backstory at the Academy, since Brachus is ultimately in basically the second round of 5 students to arrive, keeping him in the first 15 or 16 total students. The school had really just been set up, so there wasn't much to infiltrate at that point. Brachus studied with Luke for almost 3 years before Luke set a final Jedi trial for him, similar to what he himself faced in the cave on Dagobah. Brachus was horrified by what he saw and fled, staying with his mother on his home planet for a brief time and learning the extent to which the Empire had fallen apart before leaving once again. At this point, we'll jump over to a separate student whose story overlaps with Brachus's later on, named Dolph. Dolph was a young student from the planet Almania, described by Luke as a gifted, loving boy when they meet. Almania's government had supplied the rebellion during the Imperial period, but after the Thrawn campaign, communication was mostly dropped and the planet was forgotten. The drop in communication had come when a new government had taken over the planet, the Jahar government, which were basically the rich upper class on the planet. The new administration began slaughtering civilians, and the planet sent out a distress signal which the New Republic ignored because, according to Lando in the New Rebellion novel, quote, "The New Republic tries not to interfere with local rule," end quote. Dolph's family was included in this, and when he heard what was happening, he left the Academy and returned to Almania to take revenge, harboring increasing resentment against the New Republic for not acting. He took a new identity, Kueller, which may be pronounced Kueller, Queller, or Cooler, but not like the donut. He also began wearing a very 90s villain outfit. After establishing himself in control of the planet and annihilating the Jahar regime, he began plotting an insurrection against the New Republic, and to further his goals, he made contact with the despondent Brachus. While working for Kueller, Brachus was put in charge of a droid manufacturing plant on the planet Telti, and Kueller charged him with planting explosives in the droids. These were used in an attack on the Senate, detonating some of the droids which had made their way into government service and killing several senators, while also implicating Han Solo in the process and causing several of the senators to be replaced by former Imperials. Queller planned to lure Luke to Almania and kill him, which he thought would allow him to install himself as a new emperor. Luke was directed to Almania after a confrontation with Brachus, and turned out to have one of the explosive rigged circuits in his X-Wing when he landed on Almania's moon, Pidir, severely injuring him, which allowed Kueller to gain the upper hand over his former master. Luke was taken captive and tried to convince Kueller to turn away from the dark side while in captivity, but Kueller refused and continued with his plan of threatening Leia with the deaths of Luke and her family if she didn't hand the New Republic over to him, which I don't think is legally a power she had as Chief of State. Partially because of the increasing suspicion, Leia resigned as Chief of State, passing the position back to Mon Mothma, and she mounted a rescue mission along with Wedge Antilles. Han came along and brought Yzalamari to deal with Kueller. These are lizard-like creatures which had the ability to block out the Force and remove a Jedi's abilities in a small area. But this Yzalamari was eaten along with its cage by a Thurnby, a different kind of psychic lizard-like creature which Kueller kept and used to keep Luke subdued with its weird tongue and its psychic powers. Luckily for them, this Thurnby ran into the confrontation between Luke and Kueller, blocking his Force abilities and allowing Luke to kill him with a blaster. During the Almanian uprising, while Brachus had continued to serve Kueller and oppose Luke, even Kueller had said that Brachus didn't actually hate Luke, but instead hated how Luke made him feel. Luke was holding out hope for a redeemed Brachus, but this hope didn't last long. By 19 ABY, the Empire and New Republic had a peace treaty, and a subset of Imperials were very much not happy with this. A splinter group known as the Second Imperium began to claim they were led by a resurrected Palpatine, and they recruited many disaffected Imperials, including and especially Brachus. Brachus began running a pretty massive Dark Jedi Academy called the Shadow Academy, using devices he stole from Luke to track down students with a strong affinity for the Force. Over the years, this expansion of the Shadow Academy included the kidnapping of Jacen and Jaina Solo, the kids of Han and Leia. With his new army of dark Jedi, Brachus led an assault on Luke's academy. This did not go well, and when things turned south, Brachus beseeched the reborn Emperor he thought was hiding in the academy to help. This is when he learned that there was actually no Palpatine, and instead it was just 4 royal guards faking holograms. With their fraud exposed, one of the royal guards fled the academy in a shuttle, triggering a self-destruct sequence on the station, and destroyed both the academy and its master Brachus. The influence of the Shadow Academy would continue on for years. Many of the students actually survived and stayed in the Empire, as we learned in the New Jedi Order series. Our fourth and final character is one of the primary antagonists of the game Jedi Knight Jedi Outcast, Desan. He was a member of the Chistori species who was originally shunned by others because of his Force sensitivity. When he was brought to Luke's academy, he was initially happy to have somewhere to fit in, but he quickly became a bully towards the other students. When one, Havit Storm, stood up to him, he killed that student and left the academy. He soon found his way to the Empire Reborn, a xenophobic group of Imperial hardliners who took him in despite their strong hatred for aliens. This group was working with an extra-dimensional being named Waru. Waru was basically a big blob of shielded jelly, and he would purify Force sensitives by just basically eating them and spitting them back out. Really, Waru was looking for enough Force power to allow himself to open a portal and get home. Those who were regurgitated joined the ranks of the Empire Youths, a Force-sensitive group of individuals put under Desan's command. Desan and the Reborn also attempted experiments with Althusian crystals to grant Force powers to others under their command. As part of another experiment to gain more Force power, Desan tracked Kyle Katarn to the Valley of the Jedi on Rasan, a Force nexus which allowed him to increase the power of his followers significantly, calling these the Reborn. Much like Brachus would do years later, Desan and some of his Empire Reborn allies, led by Admiral Gallic Fire, decided to attack Yavin, and it was, as usual, not a good idea. Fire and his flagship, the Doomgiver, were destroyed in orbit, and Kyle was able to beat Desan in a confrontation under the temple. The timeline on Desan is one of the biggest examples of things being weird and compressed here, given the new essential chronology puts Jedi Outcast in 12 ABY, which is also when the Jedi Academy is established in the Jedi Academy trilogy, so a lot is happening very quickly here. Desan's other allies in the Empire Reborn aren't dealt with until the Crystal Star set 2 years later. I'm not 100% sure if there's some other connection here, particularly maybe with Kyle being in the Jedi Order, which required that Jedi Outcast be set in this year specifically and not spacing it out at least a little bit more, but it's entirely possible that's the case and I just don't know it. Regardless, the result is a little bit compressed, and honestly overall the timelines on Luke's Academy growth is really just best not examined too closely. Well, those are 4 of the biggest names to go dark from Luke's first years of running a Jedi praxeum. There's one major name that is missing here, Kib Durin, who we alluded to at the start. He was possessed by the same Sith Lord who drove Gantoris to the dark side, but I already covered his story briefly in the Jedi Council video since Kip, unlike the others, does return to and stay with the Jedi long term. He also deserves his own standalone video at some point since there's some interesting stuff that goes on with his character development over the years both in and out of universe. Either way, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like and subscribe for more. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see covered on the channel in the future, and hope to see you next time.